Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Work of Remembering. This is a Black History Month teaching series. My name is Robinette Cross, and I am going to be your teacher or panel hostess, depending on what we're doing each week of this series. So throughout the month of February from 7:38 p.m. to 8:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we are going to be doing the Work of Remembering. Now, tonight is going to be less interactive than most the other nights. I'm really excited. I do think that we have for week 3 a panel forming. I'm so excited about that. Um, but today or tonight, we are going to work on the concept of diaspora and diaspora as a metaphor. And so I want to spend this time helping you understand the concept of diaspora and sometimes how that concept is misused. But first, I do just want to say thank you so much for tuning in, watching whenever you have a moment, for spending your time, effort, or energy. Connecting in this space or on this platform or whatever platform you find me on here. Feel free to send questions to Layla's Rain, LaylasReign at gmail.com if you have any for me. And then, of course, you can find me by my name, Robinette D. Cross, on social media. On Facebook, I think I'm Love My AKA on Instagram because I love my AKA, of course. So a shout out to all of the sorority sisters of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Since I'm going to go ahead and make that plug, we are indeed also Black History. And I wanted to just give you a note that this is the 100th year acknowledgement of United States acknowledgement of African American history, even though we know that African American history is every day, all day. It reaches back to the beginning of time and it comes forth to the present day. Then in 100 years ago, then we had the first acknowledgement of Black History Week, that subsequently turned into Black History Month. And so I wanted to do something to edify and uplift people, communities, educators, uh, in a time where learning is much more fleeting. Or access to learning is much more fleeting than it has been in our recent history, not in our history, right? Because we're not that far removed from the 1950s or, from Plessy versus Ferguson either, right? So I just want to do some things to edify you in this space. Today we are talking about the diaspora isn't a metaphor. I'm going to share my screen so that we can all look at the presentation together. If you are watching this recording, feel free to pause, to take a break, to go back, to look at things later. It all works. It all works. It all helps. It's all for your benefit. Okay. And so I'm going to be in your corner here. I also just want to let you know some things that qualify me. I'm an historian by trade, an Africanist, but I also am a social studies teacher. I've been teaching for 15 years. I've been at the same college preparatory school for 12 years, teaching different types of history. I love history. It oozes through my pores. I am exceptional at helping people learn, but I'm also a global educator. I've taught in different countries, in multiple languages, and I love the concept of learning, eureka moments, aha moments, being able to connect different days and times and events in history so that people can understand the bigger picture and broader connection. So I do just want to let you know I've been doing this work for a long time. I may still say that I'm 25, but I've been doing this work if I say I'm 25, I've been doing this work since I was about 2 or 3. Okay. We're just going to leave it at that. So I do just want to let you know that I want to name something clearly at the start of tonight's teaching. You do not need to participate. You do not need to speak, and you don't even need to be on camera. You can simply listen. You can just be present in this moment. If you're watching this as a replay, the same holds true for you. Tonight's session is called The Diaspora Isn't a Metaphor. And I chose that title on purpose because diaspora has become one of those words that people use as a vibe, as aesthetic, as a mood, as a synonym for culture. And I want to return it to its true power. Diaspora is a historical reality, a living structure, and an analytical tool. So by the end of our time together, you will be able to do three things: define clearly diaspora in a way that is accurate and usable, distinguish diaspora from related terms like immigration, diversity, or ancestry, and then use a simple framework, what I call a diaspora lens or diasporic lens. You can say a diaspora lens or diasporic lens to interpret history, identity, and even current events with more clarity. And so let's begin with tonight's teaching. So excited. Diaspora matters because it helps us name what happened without flattening it. It keeps it dynamic. It keeps you don't look through one lens and you don't have to look through one lens that is presented to you. It helps us understand that Black history is not only national, it's not only American history, it is global. It is a global concept. It is layered. As a matter of fact, Black History Month is celebrated this month in multiple different countries. So, and then some other countries celebrate Black History Month in months like October. So, this idea of Black History Month is it's not something that is singularly belonging to the United States. It is connected, it is shaped by forced movement, chosen movement, and everything that's in between that. And diaspora matters because without it, we often end up in one of two extremes. Either we tell a story that is too neat, it's too well put together, it's too linear, and it is flat, or we tell a story that is too scattered, like everything is disconnected. And so we cannot see the interwovings, the tapestry of the connectivity of that storyline. So either way, um, we need to make sure that we include this complexity. Diaspora gives us a way to hold complexity with clarity. It's it lets us say something like people are moved, people survived, people created, people remained connected. So it adds personhood, right? It adds breath and life and experience to the concept of movement and moving. And what does that mean to have to be abruptly by choice or by force or to be planned and uprooted and placed in another location and then find who you are in relation to that space and choose in some instances to survive and develop a new culture or try your best to hold on to elements of cultures that have long since been removed from your feet, the land where you live, right? So what does that mean? And you have to make it as complex as it is. And those connections through culture, politics, memory, and longing are still shaping the world in which we currently live. So when I say the diaspora isn't a metaphor, what I mean is this is not poetic language. It is not marketing language. This is not something that we say to sound deep. It is a real structure of history. So let's talk about what diaspora is and what it is not. Let's define it carefully. Here's a working definition that I came up with, and I wanted to make sure that you had access to it. So you can feel free to screenshot it, snap it, whatever you need to do. Here's a working definition that I want you to hold on to at least while we are in this learning space. I'll say it in a slightly different way. Okay. A diaspora is what happens when displacement creates a community that remains connected through shared memory and cultural continuity, even across multiple locations and generations. Now, let's be very clear about what diaspora is not. Diaspora is not the same thing as immigration. Immigration is movement from one place to another, and diaspora includes movement, but it also includes ongoing connection, and it usually includes a relationship to power. There is a power dynamic: who moved, why they moved, and what was taken or denied in the course of that movement. It is not the same thing as diversity. Diversity is a demographic reality, right? So when you say that we have diversity, you can say that we have people, in the United States who are African American, who are Asian American, who are Indigenous American, who are, you see, that's diversity. That's a demographic reality. Diaspora is a historic and cultural relationship. It is not the same thing as ancestry. You can have ancestry without living a diasporic identity. Diasporic identity is shaped by context, generation, culture, language, community, politics, and lived experience. And finally, diaspora is not a synonym for Africa. Africa is not one place. It is a continent of many regions, ethnic groups, languages, religions, and histories. And when people say the diaspora and mean Africa, they often, what they're doing is collapsing the complexity and erasing specificity. As a matter of fact, the term diaspora, when it was first introduced as a subject of study, was not connected to the continent of Africa at all. They were talking about the Holocaust when scholars first introduced the concept of diaspora, or the Jewish diaspora, not the Holocaust, but the Jewish diaspora, right? Because that's a disbursement of people. So if you want to think about disbursement, you can say the movement, whether force or by choice, but you always have to look at the why, and you also have to look at the connectivity. So diaspora is not one place. It actually demands the opposite. Diaspora requires specificity. Who are we talking about? Which routes, which histories, which communities, which power structures? You have to define all those things. And so now, one important note, diaspora can include both force and voluntary movement. That's why when initially I said it can include, right, immigration, it can include migration, but it is not solely migration, right? So in many Black histories, especially in the Americas, forced movement is foundational. The transatlantic slave trade, colonization, and coerced labor systems. But diaspora also includes later voluntary movements such as migration for work, education, safety, opportunity, and even family. Sometimes both exist in one family line, and they can exist simultaneously. Sometimes they exist in one lifetime, right? Sometimes, when you're talking about the Great Migration, which we'll talk about later on, the Great Migration included more than one generation of family members, but it happened during a period of historic time. So we hold diaspora with honesty, not romanticized and not reduced. Okay. Now I want to give you a framework that you can keep or use or not. If you remember nothing else tonight, please remember this, that diasporas form through four different types of movement: force, forces, routes, remaking, and reconnection. Forces, routes, remaking, and reconnection. So let's walk through each one. First, we have forces. Forces are the pressures that move people. These are not neutral. They're often shaped by power. So you always have to look at power dynamics. Okay. So in relation to, for the African diaspora, forces include the transatlantic slave trade, colonization and land seizure, right? Labor extraction and economic coercion, war and instability, racial terror and displacement, And later, education opportunities, employment opportunities, and then other global types of opportunities, right? So forces answer the question, what pushed or pulled a people to move and who benefited? What pushed or pulled a people to move, right? What forced them out and what connected them, what pulled them, what magnetic force pulled them, right? What interests them to move. And so, secondly, routes. Routes are the pathways of movements, and they include the Atlantic world. They include the Caribbean, North and South America, Europe, the Middle East, of course, they include North Africa because we're talking about the continent of Africa. But I do want to do a pause here because a lot of times when people think the African diaspora, they're only talking about sub-Saharan Africa, and that is something with which I take umbrage because Sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa are still all Africa, right? And so it's just also a question of what diaspora are you representing because there are sub-diasporas inside of the African diaspora, right? So when I use the term African diaspora, I am not only speaking of sub-Saharan Africa, I am talking about those who come from the continent of Africa, okay? So also the Middle East. Hey, mommy, and internal movements within nations, especially the Great Migration in the United States. So, routes answer the question of where did people go and what worlds did they enter? Where did they go and what worlds did they enter? Now, the third concept or form is remaking. Remaking is what people do when they arrive. So, push someone out or pull them in? Where did they go? And then when they arrive in a space, what did they do? And this is the part that we often underestimate because survival is not only enduring, survival is creating, which means that you have to create new forms. You may have to create new languages. You may have to create new naming practices. You may have to create new food ways and music and rhythm, right? May have to create new faith practices and kinship and family structures. You may have to create new political consciousness, right? You have to create humor sometimes in the very face of trauma and create new styles and celebrations and even create new styles for mourning or new types of mourning and tradition. Remaking answers the type of question that says, what did people carry? What did people carry with them when they moved? What did they lose? Right? What did they lose across those trade routes? Or what did they lose when they were coming across the Atlantic? And what did they create anyway? What did they create anyway? What was that enduring power that they used to create something new, right? So when we're thinking about that, we have forces, routes, remaking, and the fourth one is reconnection. So reconnection is the ongoing relationship between dispersed communities and a homeland. Now that could be real or imagined. As a matter of fact, there was a great historian, Benedict Anderson, who wrote about imagined communities. This is not the same thing. It's an offshoot of it, but this connection can be real or imagined and they can be with one another. It's with one another. So this idea of reconnection can look like remembering and storytelling as something that's passed down from generation to generation, or it can live in things like novels or epics, right? Cultural survival and heritage practices, right? This is where we have something like Kwanzaa recognition. Genealogy and DNA testing, that whole ancestry.com, right? Political movements like Pan-Africanism, which we saw really build at the turn of the 20th century. We saw our first Pan-African Congress happening in London in 1901, right? So we see three Pan-African Congress meetings happening in the early 20th century. And then we see stuff like the Harlem Renaissance, right? And so that includes, political movements, consciousness movements, return travel or homegoing. Lots of people are doing a return travel. They are getting new names and new identities. They are getting their African names, even if they are unaware of the exact location where their people come, even if they don't know exactly what that means. This idea of reconnection means that I know that I originate from this space I don't know, I might not know where, but the idea that I am connecting to something that was denied me or forgotten is important, right? That's why it says real or imagined. Digital community across borders, which is wonderful. The internet is phenomenal. And solidarity movements across nations, the way that we connect. So, what's happening, for example, in Burkina Faso, what's happening in Senegal, people are supporting it in the African diaspora is because it's connected, right? It's all connected. And we want to see that, we want to see them win. So, reconnection answers the question of what remains connected even across time and distance. So, we got focus, routes, remaking, and reconnection. Three concrete examples to make it stick as well is we have what we call the Black Atlantic. So I've used real pictures for you here, as we call the Black Atlantic, and that includes the transit. That's across the movement of African bodies across the Atlantic. Most of the time, that's called the transatlantic slave trade, right? And so what we know is there are at the bare minimum 12 million Africans who were transported across the Atlantic in the between the 16th and 19th century. That's what we know, right? It's foundational. It is not simply movement. That included like forced displacement. That included kidnapping. That included movement, a kidnapping inside of the continent of Africa that moved from one region to another. People were kidnapped and moved from kidnapped location to another kidnapped location until they reached the coast, and then they were forced, right? And then they were moved across the ocean. So it was forced displacement, forced extraction of labor, and then the attempt to sever identity. People were not allowed to keep their names. They were not allowed to speak their indigenous language. They were not allowed to practice their religions. They were not allowed to go wherever they wanted to go. They were denied an identity. As a matter of fact, that's why so many African Americans now don't know their name. And that's also why you had people like Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam use X as a surname, because since the identity was denied people from the continent of Africa, then they refused to attach a name for them that seems more foreign, right? And so they use the term X because they're not certain of what their true surname is. So that breaking or severing of identity until we get to this reclamation. The truth is, even when systems try to erase people, people recreated themselves. The power of endurance is what it is, right? The power of endurance, the power of an endurance, a refusal to die. Now, some people, their act of protest was to die. That's an act of protest. And that's a choice because they didn't know, um, where they were going, and they did not want themselves or maybe their children, their babies, to endure this new foreign brutality. And so the ocean swallowed them up. As a matter of fact, something new, that maybe it may be new to you, is that sharks began to pace the routes along the transatlantic slave trade because they knew that people were going to be thrown overboard or they were going to throw themselves overboard. So they knew they had food. They were following those slave ships, and you can see a pattern of sharks moving from coast to coast across the Atlantic because they, during the period of this transatlantic slave trade, because they knew bodies were sure food for them, right? But what they didn't know is that we were a resilient people. So now we have the formation of new languages. You can't speak your original language. That doesn't mean you can't make one up. That doesn't mean you can't bring elements, right? New spiritual traditions were formed. New music was formed. New ways of surviving formed. Diaspora is not just the story of what was taken, but it's also the story of what was built in spite of what was taken. So the second example is the Great Migration. Okay, which is diasporic movement within a nation. That's diaspora within a nation. Sometimes people assume diaspora only means across oceans, but that's not necessarily the case. It means diaspora at its core is a disbursement. It's a disbursement of people. It also happens inside borders when movement is shaped by power or by power dynamics. So the Great Migration that happens at the end of the 19th century to the turn of the 20th century happened because there were millions and millions of African Americans who were fleeing from the American South because their lives were in danger from groups like the Ku Klux Klan. And so they, by and large, were sharecropping and they had to get up out of there for their own safety. They were denied voting rights. They had poll taxes, but they were being lynched as well, right? And people were having a gay old time putting it in the newspapers about lynching. So these people were fleeing for their lives, and we call this the Great Migration. And the Great Migration did not stop just in the southern portion of the United States. People from the Caribbean participated in this Great Migration as well. That's how Marcus Garvey got to New York. So what we see is Black Americans are moving from the South to the North and West, and that was shaped by racial terror, economic exploitation with those sharecroppers, a desire to find safety because surely any place else in the United States in their mind had to be better than the South. And the desire for possibility, for land, for better jobs, even if those jobs were industry jobs, right? I might not be able to read, but by golly, I can work on a machine, right? I might not be able to read, I might not be able to do this, but I surely can till some land. So if new land is promised to me if I go west, I'm gonna go. Right. So that's what's pulling people. What's that attraction? Right. And so we can see that in the Great Migration, that was a movement north and a movement west. That movement reshaped cultures and practices, and it reshaped things like cities, music, right? Labor and identity. That is diasporic logic, forces, routes, remaking, reconnection. And then our third and final example is diasporic or diaspora identity. So today, diaspora identity often takes shape through culture and practices as much as geography. People may feel connected through things like music. Everybody loves a little Fela Kuti, right? Fela Ransom Kuti. We love a good Afrobeat. That's the big thing right now, Afrobeat. Well, who's the father of Afrobeat? This Nigerian named Fela Ransom Kuti. And Afrobeat was the beat of resistance, right? He was a cussing man, and he had his own city that he and his mama and his wives lived in because they were completely against colonization. I'm talking about this movement, that music was resistive music, right? The music that we really wanted to, it makes you have a connection because he was so emboldened by it. And now that music has gone and flowed into mainstream culture. Oh, we're connected by music. We're connected by things like the blues, those songs that were work songs turned into spirituals, those communication songs for runaways turned into spirituals, that turned into church songs, that turned into the blues, that filtered over into jazz, that are now into our regular mainstream. So, how is this movement happening, right? Language, shared struggle, even if you're not in the same location, oh, you can relate to the struggle, right? And global movements. And then last but not least, public memory. So diaspora or diasporic identity can be complex, it can be layered, it can be contested, which leads us into what I want to address next, which is the myths. So I love a big old myth busting opportunity. I love a myth busting opportunity. I do this in my class all the time, and I do this with teachers, and I do this with educators all the time. One thing I'm not afraid to do is have a courageous conversation in the face of people who look different, right? Because it's okay to say it's okay to be uncomfortable, and change doesn't happen without discomfort, right? One thing I've been very inspired by is the monks' walk, the venerable monks and their walk for peace. And people see them, and I see them, I'm in awe of not only them, but also the planning that they put in place in order to complete this 2,300-mile walk by foot. And to know that this was planned, it was purposed, right? And I absolutely love their why, right? Because people want this to be some magnanimous end, and they asked the venerable monk, the lead venerable monk, "What are you going to do when you get to after you get to the capital?" He said, "We're gonna go back. We're gonna go back to Texas," right? But then you forget what the struggle was, right? It looks good. They look like they're not suffering, but then you look at their feet and their feet are bleeding and they're wrapped up and they have calluses. And he said, the lead venerable monk, he said, we never have a good night's sleep. We never get a good night's sleep. Why? Because their bodies are aching. They walk 30, 33 miles a day, and this is not their first one, obviously. But my point is, it is necessary, even though by look they're walking for peace, which feels good. The cause is good, but it is not without discomfort. It is not without feeling uncomfortable. And if those men can feel uncomfortable while they're walking for peace, we can have courageous conversations about it, right? That's what I say. So let's talk about 5 myths and better truths. Let's name some common myths people carry about diaspora. Diaspora is a place. Now, by now, you should know good and well that it's not. We had this discussion, right? The truth about it is, diaspora is a relationship across places. Myth number 2, diaspora is only pain. That is the farthest from the truth. I'm going to tell you something right now. If you look at the formation of people groups across, and I'm talking about members of the African diaspora who are in the Americas with African American, Caribbean, Afro-Caribbean cultures, you cannot really look at us and see only pain. One thing that we can do, right, is make a miracle out of a merciful moment. One thing we can do is have a good time now. You people might not understand how it's possible, but it is the spirit of resilience. Diaspora is not only pain. Absolutely not. It includes rupture, yes, but it also includes creativity and innovation and resilience that becomes a part of culture. So myth number 3, diaspora means everyone is basically the same. That is a foolish concept. And one thing that I can say in this space, that I was called with a few of my friends who are professionals, who just so happen to be educated African American women, is a monolith. And if you could ever, so that's just like saying all Black people are the same. If you could say a monolith to anybody, that's just like saying all of this people group is the same, which is a foolish concept. Diaspora doesn't mean everyone is basically the same. No two people are the exact same, not even twins, not even identical twins. The better truth is diaspora includes shared origins and shaped histories of power, but it produces diverse communities. It produces different languages and different religions and different types of politics or political bends and different identities. So that's what, you cannot expect one to speak for everyone, one person to speak for everyone. That is harmful because they're not all the same, right? Myth number 4 is diaspora identity or diasporic identity is automatic. That's not true. Diasporic identity is shaped by generation, proximity, community, and context. And some people feel it deeply, but some people feel it differently. Some people feel differently about it. They don't feel the same type of connection, and that's okay. Some feel it through things like culture, or some feel it through politics, or some feel it through family memory, but they may not always feel the same deep connection that other people feel who share their bloodline or could trace their bloodline back to similar origins, right? And so it's different for different groups of people. And the final myth that we want to talk about is diaspora talk or diasporic talk replaces local history. Oh, that's a fool's gold there. The better truth is diaspora deepens local history. It helps us understand that what we call local was shaped by global forces, right? And that local decisions echo outward. So this is why diaspora matters for Black History Month. It keeps us from telling a story that is too small, that is flattened. So for example, when I take people here in Richmond, we have a Richmond Trail of Enslaved Africans that I take people on from time to time. It's a 3 mile walk. And people look at Richmond sometimes now and they say, oh, Richmond is home to some of the top 5 Forbes, Forbes 500, excuse me, that they say is home to 5 of the Forbes 5 top 500, and that it's bustling and all that jazz. Okay, well, let's take a look see. At the time, during the transatlantic slave trade, right, Richmond actually had the largest movement of enslaved bodies coming through it in this region. At one time, Richmond was moving 170,000 people through it to go north or south of its location because of the James River, right? And then in 1808, when the slave trade was abolished in the United States, how were Richmonders supposed to recuperate those funds? Well, take a look see at things like uh, mm, take a look see at things like the factories. Factories are all down in what we call Shockoe Bottom. Those factories were built by enslaved people. The factories that cost $2,000 to live in now, that we think are luxury over the James, whose hands built those, right? Whose pressure built those, right? And then the very people who were enslaved, those were the people who were also forced to bring supplies to Confederate soldiers because Richmond was once the capital of the Confederacy. So when we start to think about how pretty Richmond is, right? It's nice, but do not make it devoid of the history or the diasporic connections that it also has, right? Okay, so let's just make sure we continue to complicate the story. You got to complicate the story because if you don't, it falls flat. And that's why people don't want to listen. And that's why people say they hate social studies or they hate history because people make it boring. The way to keep it fun, fancy, and footloose is to add the other characters. The what had happened was that's the best part, right? So the diasporic lens or the diaspora lens, your takeaway tools. Hey, Mr. Miss! That's Mr. Harvey. We love him. My gym buddy, is what I want to give you is a tool that you can use after tonight, and it's called the diaspora or diasporic lens. Three questions that can kind of help you interpret a family story, an historical event, or even a headline. Okay, we got lots of headlines that are coming from different parts of the world, and not only the United States, because I think sometimes that can get a little saturated. One thing, you don't want to do that. You don't want to saturate yourself. You want to diversify your news, what's being given to you. You want to you want to really go look through different outlets so that you can diversify your thinking as well. So a diasporic lens, number one is what forces moved people. Remember, what forces move people? Who benefited? Who paid the cost? Who was coerced? And who was chosen? And I do just want to let you know it's not always cut and dry. It's not always cut and dry. You want to say you want to think people resisted, but there is no resistance without some form of collaboration. Who collaborated? Who benefited? Don't just think, for example, when we're talking about the transatlantic trade, that it was just Europeans who benefited. You have whole kingdoms, Ashanti, Dahomey, that functioned off of the trade of enslaved Africans. Who benefited, right? There is a reckoning that has to come as you excavate. So the second one is what was carried and recreated, what survived, what transformed, and what became new culture. So, for example, how do we get the creation of things like voodoo or hoodoo? How does that end up in Haiti or Haiti and subsequently in Louisiana? And what changed? What morphed with that? Right? How do you get things like capoeira? That is a changing, right? And that is a that what becomes part of new cultures. You can really see if you study that. Drumming. You can see it clearly in the creation of his of the Black Greek letter organizations. Step. All of that is the what became new culture. And so then we look at what connections remain today. How do memory, identity, politics, and belonging show up across distance and time? How do they show up across distance and time? So if you apply these three questions, you begin to see how history actually lives. You begin to see Black history is not simply a list of milestones, right? You can say all day long, on this day, Rosa Parks said, on this day, Carter G. Woodson created. On this day, right, Booker T. Washington founded. On this day, the W.E.B. Du Bois graduated from Harvard. On this day, right? But all it's just saying is on this day, where is the depth? Where's the connection? Where is the continuity, right? And so it helps you to see continuity where continuity would not exist if it were just a simple flat linear history. So you began to see that it's a web of movement, power, memory, and creation. And you began to see diaspora not as a metaphor, but as a structure that you can use to ask deep questions. So now you are ready to do some bridging. When we say the work of remembering, we are talking about remembering well, accurately, specifically, and with responsibility. Diaspora invites us to hold both truth and tenderness at the same time. So, truth about power and displacement, tenderness about the human need for belonging. And we all really need it. And anybody who says they don't is just putting on for somebody else, but we all need to feel like we belong. That is one of the core components of a civilization. We all belong in a civilization. We all what belong to a civilization. And one of the core components is how civilizations work together, how communities work together. The culture of belonging is cultivated, and respect for what people built, even under conditions meant to break them. Resilience. So next week, we're going to turn our attention to a different session. But what I first want to let you also know is tonight I am launching something. If you stayed with me for this long, I do want to just share it with you. We had an idea. This was actually an idea that one of my darling sisters sent to me. She saw something on Shark Tank and she said, Robin, I think you can do this because of my training and my skill set, I really love the idea of telling a story. I always say if I believed in a former life, I would have been a griot in my former life. I love a good story, right? And so I created something called African History by Mail, the diaspora in context. So this is a perfect time to talk about it because what it is if you can imagine having something, a connection to the continent of Africa or African diasporic history, right? And you can connect it, then you'll get something in the mail that it's a replica of a primary source document. It's not the actual primary source document, but if you could get a replica of something from Timbuktu or a replica of a treaty or a replica of something that was in a sacred language, and then its translation. It provides you with four historical artifacts that are inspired by real primary sources, clear and accessible explanations about it. You'll get stories that can connect you to that part of Africa and that time period, and then it's curated for you every month, and it arrives in an envelope, a flat envelope, so no bending. I don't like bent documents. It arrives in an envelope for you every first of the month. So for Black History Month, then our first batch will go out next Monday next Monday. Or I think next Monday might be a holiday. So that Tuesday, go out that Tuesday. And that is a special founding offer of $8.99 a month. And then every month after that, it is $12.99. And so we would love to have you be one of the founding members. I'm really excited to bring this to you as a brainchild of mine. And oh, what great relief it would be to be able to have something that you can actually pass down, that you can relate to, that is what we say is for the culture, right? All right. So if you're interested in it, let me know, or you can scan the QR code and go ahead and sign up for your first parcel. Next week, we are going to be talking about Virginia as a classroom, how place tells the truth. And I love that because I also am a honors US and Virginia history teacher at the school where I teach. So I've got a lot to say about Virginia, but then we've made a lot of history here, good and bad, right? So join us next Wednesday from 7:30 to 8:45 p.m. or depending on when we stop, 7:30 to 8:30. And let's keep learning together. If you have any questions, then you can feel free to email me at Layla's Rain, that's LAYLASREIGN @gmail.com. Or you can connect with me on my socials Facebook, I'm Robinette D. Cross. Instagram, I think yeah, I'm Love My AKA because I love my AKA. Or you can also just email me. Okay. All right. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate how you have been with me in both spaces today. I wish you joy, peace, comfort, and don't forget to go and be great on purpose. Take care, everybody. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day.